Good morning. Tom Mentzer, our chair, is not here this morning, so I'm going to substitute for Tom. I'm Ken Mabarak. To my right is my cheat sheet here, George Sheets. Then we have David Stringer, and to his right is Joe Gardner. To my left is Terry Marshall and Len Scarmata. Welcome to the May, what's today?
How about the 14th?
May 14th City Council meeting. We have our councilman, Leason, is not here this morning, but we have city staff is Frank Hall, and our new attorney, new to Planning Commission, and again, I forget your name already.
Clyde Halstead.
Clyde Halstead from the legal department, who's stepping in. He says he's a trial attorney, so if he has to answer a question, be careful. It'll be a long and passionate answer, I'm sure. First item on the agenda this morning is the approval of the minutes of the March 12th, 2015 meeting.
Motion approved.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor, raise your right hand, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We have a short agenda today. It's just one item. It's rezoning number 15003 for a parcel on 903 Green Lane at Willow Creek Road. And since Frank's the only one here from the planning department, I assume he's going to be delivering.
Yes, sir. I'm it today.
The good news about that. And just as an overview, it's currently zoned single family 18, and it's an 18, which is a single family 18,000 square foot lot zoning. Desiring to change that to residential office zoning district. The applicant is Michael Taylor, renowned architect in town, and the community planner, of course, is Frank Hall. Frank, I'm going to let you just chat about what this is, but I have one question that you might want to update the public on, is what is RO zoning, and how might that differ from NOB zoning?
Okay. I can address that right now before we get into it, if you'd like. The neighborhood-oriented business zoning, which is NOB, and the residential office zoning, which is RO. Residential office is the least intense commercial or business classification that we have. We have residential office, neighborhood-oriented business, business general, business regional, and then the industrial districts. Residential office is meant to be a transition zone between residential, commercial, and residential. Neighborhood-oriented businesses are supposed to be more, a little bit more intense, but still in the residential district, sort of compatible with the residential community. But then you start getting into the business general categories and business regional categories. They're exclusively commercial categories. So RO and NRB are the less intense, with RO being, quote, transitional to a residential zone.
Okay. Are residences allowed in the residential? I mean, if you chose to just have a house there, you could do that.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
In RO zoning, NRB, and even in business general and business regional, we allow residential uses. So residential uses are allowed in the commercial districts, but not all commercial uses are allowed in the residential districts.
Right. So if we rezone it, it doesn't prohibit the use that it has today continuing, or another residential property coming in there.
That's correct.
But it would be single family residential, or could it be an apartment building?
In RO zoning, I'd have to look that up, but I believe you could have multifamily in there. I'd have to look that up, though, make sure.
Right. Can I comment on it?
Sure.
Okay, the history coming out.
Professor.
Anything that's a higher zoning than what is previously zoned, that's a permitted use. For example, if you take a property that's zoned residential and you upgrade it to apartments, multifamily, mid, you can always build a single-family house, which is the category lower. If you changed it to NOB, you could do an apartment house because it's allowed, it's a lower zoning. If you had business zoning, you wanted to build an office building, you can do it on it because it's zoned for a higher use. So anything that's categorized as a lower use or lower density under the zoning laws is allowed without having to do anything special about rezoning.
Well,
So
then
somebody could
how does
have
that work, like, out at Center Point East or something, where they had homes and they rezone it to industrial, but now that there's no new building permits for homes in there? Is that
has
different
nothing
because
to
it's
do
an
with it.
airport corridor or
If
something?
I wanted to turn around and on
Yeah.
a piece of industrial property, build a mansion, I could do it with this underlying zoning without having to change the zoning from heavy industrial to residential.
And of course,
So
you
you
might
can
have,
always go
you might have
down
some
in
water
zoning.
issues too that might preclude the single family.
And I'm stating this from the years of experience, and I'm the chairman of the Code Rewrite Committee, but that's how basically it operates. Am I correct, Frank?
Yes, sir. I did check while you were talking, the multifamily dwellings would be allowed in RO and NOB. The industrial residences in industrial districts are allowed except when you get into the really high industrial classifications, then typically it's a caretaker's dwelling associated with an industrial category.
Okay, great, thank you. Didn't mean to divert you.
That's okay. That's all right.
Have your way.
Thank you. As you said, Mr. Chairman, the property we're talking about is right on the corner of Willow Creek Road and Green Lane. The gentleman is proposing, the applicant is proposing to rezone it from single-family 18 to residential office for a 6,000 square foot office building. You can see the property highlighted out in red here, a little bit of a glare, but it's right there on the corner, on the southwest corner of Green Lane and Willow Creek Road. The surrounding properties, as you can see in that neighborhood, are all single-family 18. There is a residential office property, similar zoning as to what the applicant is requesting across Willow Creek Road on the southeast corner. And there's business general directly to the north across Green Lane, and a church on the northeast corner. The proposed use that the applicant is requesting for the residential office would be allowed for the residential office zoning would be allowed in that zoning classification. That's why he needs to change it, or is requesting to change it to residential office. The 2003 general plan does have this property designated as single-family 18, so therefore, this, in addition to the rezoning, there will need to be a recommendation for a change to the 2003 general plan and the Willow Creek corridor study, which the property is highlighted there in green, does not have it designated for a zoning change. So we'll need the rezoning, an amendment to the 2003 general plan, and an amendment to the Willow Creek corridor plan. Let me zoom out here for a moment. This is the property that is designated for requesting the rezoning, and a proposed, at this time preliminarily, a proposed 6,000 square foot office building with parking around it. Green Lane, Willow Creek Road is to the west, to the east, and Green Lane to the north. This property did go through PAC, pre-application conference, with staff, and one of the comments came out that the entrance to the property will have to be from all the way to the west, as far as possible to the west, away from the intersection. There's currently 2 entrances to the property for the residential use, but a single driveway is going to be proposed all the way to the west, and the applicant's prepared to address the transportation questions that I know is a concern for the commission and the public.
What
Yes, sir.
What is directly across the street on Green Street? What are those structures there? That is commercial?
Yes,
Yeah.
that is commercial building. It's a PAD for business general, so that could be a whole host of things. I believe right now it's medical. Some medical and professional offices.
Thank you. So this is the only corner that is not that is not currently being used for some kind of commercial purpose or for a church?
Correct. Correct. And just a point of reference, the property across that is residential office, if you look at the Willow Creek Corridor study, where I mentioned that this was not designated for a zoning change, neither was that corner. Only the ones in stripes or in the little dots were recommended or considered for any kind of a zoning change. So this one did receive a zoning change to residential office, but it wasn't recommended in the Willow Creek Road. So at that time, probably had a amendment to the general plan and amendment to the Willow Creek, similar to this request.
Frank, could you take a moment and talk about the Willow Creek Corridor plan? One of my understandings in the plan is that properties on either side of Willow Creek Road would have the potential, if not already existing, opportunity for commercial type uses or RO type uses because of the traffic on Willow Creek Road.
If you look at the 2003 general plan, the Willow Creek corridor, say that the commercial corridor overlay along Willow Creek and the Willow Creek corridor plan, all of them, you have to look at them sort of separately. The Willow Creek corridor study, which was done a long time ago, has certain properties designated for consideration of a zoning change and those that were considered for a zoning change but were disregarded for that change. That's what the little dots are. So even though the corridor is largely, we know as, just by driving it, a commercial corridor, if they're not in the plan that way, they're not necessarily, quote, designated for office use without a rezoning, without this type of process. When you look at the commercial corridor overlay, which is in our land development code, that is largely an overlay to designate development activity for compatibility with architectural standards, with lighting standards for our dark sky code, and for compatibility with surrounding uses. So that's just a designation of a certain depth on either side of Willow Creek Road for commercial, for architectural considerations, lighting considerations, and the like. But yes, that is a commercial corridor, but if it's not zoned for that, it would still have to go through a process like this one today.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
This is typical of what we would call in the planning an arterial street. Anyone that drove from the hospital intersection all the way down to where it intersects with Willow Lake Road knows that it's in transition. The traffic counts are tremendous. We're not talking about doing a major retail center on this corner. We're talking about a transitional type zoning. I certainly could approve it because it fits the category of a street in transition, just like Highway 69 did, or White Spar Road did, or Iron Springs Road, that with the traffic counts and the curb cuts, we certainly want to prevent more curb cuts on Willow Creek Road, and by taking this out of R18 and putting the driveway as far west on Green Lane as could be, we're eliminating a potential hazard of having those curb cuts coming out, which also is a consideration for zoning change. And I see no reason, other than neighborhood objections, which I haven't heard any yet, about why we shouldn't go ahead and approve this zoning.
Thank you.
And sir, if I could mention one more thing. One of the things that will have to happen if this property is developed in other than a residential format is the applicability of our neighborhood residential protection standards. If this is changed to RO and is developed as an office, the neighbors to the south and west will have to will have to apply to this site the residential protection standards in our land development code, which is buffering, landscaping, lighting considerations, and the like.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Perhaps now we should have, see if the applicant wants to get up and defend thyself.
I don't think Mike has to defend himself.
I don't think so either.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Temporary Chairman, members of the Commission. Michael Taylor, 544 Wet Sign, Prescott. First off, thanks for hearing our request this morning. We appreciate your considered look at the property, the surrounding properties, the context of this intersection specifically. We understand the general plan sort of ignored this intersection other than a fairly dense commercial development immediately north of us. And by the way, the property immediately north of it also is commercial, operating as, I believe, a daycare or school of some sort. We feel that this property is less viable or certainly less desirable as a residential property as Willow Creek was widened and now the traffic counts continue to go up. We feel that the RO zoning is the most appropriate because it is the lowest impact zoning other than residential that you can do. It limits us significantly to what can go into that building. I did want to point out that on our site plan, we've been working through the different aspects of it and the screening. The driveway can certainly be pushed further to the west. With only 20 or 22 parking spots on site, we don't feel that we're generating a significant amount of traffic that would cause major conflicts on Green Lane. Mr. Hahn, the owner of the property, is also here today. Mr. Hahn has lived in that neighborhood just west on Green Lane for about 20 years, so he's very familiar with the traffic and the impacts in that neighborhood. I also wanted to point out that the property immediately west of us that is residential actually wraps around our property and encompasses us on the south. Mr. Hahn had negotiated a easement across that small sliver on the south for his use on this property, and we feel that that space, it's not wide enough to really be buildable, so it actually helps us with buffering from the other properties further south. So just wanted to point that out.
So you're saying, Michael, that the property to the west is Mr. Hahn's property?
It is not his property. He does have a easement across that property. It is still a residentially zoned piece, so we can't use it for part of our development, but it may be or does provide some buffering also to properties further south.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I have a question for Michael. Regarding the curb cut, is there any reason that the building can't be slid clear up against Willow Creek and put the curb cut on the west property line?
That might be a question for Mr. Hall. I believe that there was some concern about having the parking adjacent to the residential, and the preference was to have the building. Is that correct, Frank?
There were two concerns with pushing it all the way against Willow Creek. One was line of sight distance for traffic turning out onto Willow Creek with the large building, 6,000 square foot building on that corner. And in addition, the buffering standards with the residential protection code, we can have the building meet setbacks on that side property line next to the residences and have space for landscaping. With concrete for parking, there's increased activity, headlights pulling in, shining into the windows of the neighboring property, horns beeping, cars revving up, things like that early in the morning when people come to work. So we felt it would be less impacting on the neighbors if the building was buffered on that side rather than having cars with headlights pulling in and out.
Thank you. And I know in concert with the budget crisis the city is having, we weren't given larger sheets, so could you tell us what the setback is on the west?
Sure.
Let's see. I read
17 feet on that side, I believe so.
It'll be at least a 7-foot setback on that side. I believe the applicant is proposing about 9.
I think it's shown as 8.
So it's 8.
Thank you.
And just another minor point, the RO, we believe, would give us the ability to do either professional offices or medical offices. The building that is shown in the current site plan would indicate a professional office. If we were to go to medical, the building would effectively be reduced because of the parking required for that, just giving us a little more opportunity to offset that driveway.
And you say you have no issue with moving that driveway, as shown here, a little further to the west?
Not at all. Not at all. We want to make sure that we satisfy solid waste and what they need to access the dumpster, and turning radiuses, of course, but no, we would certainly endeavor to move that as far west as possible, if that was the commission's desire.
Regarding the building and its use, are you looking at it to be somewhat modular in terms of where you could have 3 fairly sizable businesses or 10 smaller businesses, or to where you have flexibility in terms of your offerings in there?
Certainly, when you look at professional and medical office rentals in this town, having some flexibility is important. You'll see that we've indicated sidewalks on the east side of the building, indicating maybe 2 or 3 different access points. So certainly it could be 1 tenant, it could be 2 or 3. I can't imagine any more than about 4. When you get down to about a 1,500 square foot space, that's getting pretty small.
Do we have any other questions for the applicant? Thank you, Michael.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any members of the audience who'd like to get up and talk about this project? Yes, sir. Please step forward and give us your name and your address.
Bill Van Morgan, I'm the president of Homeowners Association for the Santa Fe Springs piece, which is very close to this location. The main concern we have is the problem with the corner of Green Lane and Willow Creek. There's a sign there that says no turning on. There's a real problem with when you look down Willow Creek, if you're sitting on Green Lane and make a turn, you can't see the traffic coming at you. And we're wondering, what's happening? Is there an improvement going to happen on that corner? Because we travel through there all the time, and probably 20% of the people run that light, and that's a pretty dangerous corner.
So you're referring to people heading east and then turning north on Willow Creek?
Well, when you can't turn on what you have to do is you have to stop when you're turning a right turn here. You can't just stop and then make the right turn, because you don't have good visibility you're coming up the hill on Willow Creek there. You don't have good visibility.
I'm lost when you say up the hill, down the hill.
Okay, well, if we look at
east, west, south, north, I understand.
All right, so we're looking at Green Lane, which runs right there, and that's west, right?
Right.
So when you pull up to that corner to make a right turn, you can't stop and go right. You have to wait until the light changes. There's a sign there that says you can't make that. But invariably, a lot of people just run through that light. Right, so they stop, they make a stop, and then they keep going. And so it's a hazard, and there's been numbers of accidents there, and Green Lane is very narrow, and you cannot see around that corner beyond that residential development that's right next to us.
Right. Explain this to me.
You're saying residential development next to you? Or
no, I mean that commercial development, which was part of the same development that built Santa Fe Springs, which is
Frank, you have the pointer. It looks like when you look at Green Lane, and if you're traveling to the east or west on Green Lane, coming to that corner, that there's a piece there right underneath your head of your pen that's not on the property, because the property line is straight. Is that a piece of property the city owns, or is that city right away, or is it, what is that on that particular corner?
That is city right of way.
It is city right of way. So basically, an improvement should be made to that intersection where that little piece of property is either paved, or it's a right turn lane, or it's something, so that the visibility would improve. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, our concern is that we see people running that light all the time.
Yes, I understand that now. Now that I see it, and I see that you're really facing somewhat southwest, and then all of a sudden you want to make a turn to the north, And because of the site visibility and that little hook that's in the property line and the way the road is paved, it's hard to see any traffic, and they turn around, and even though there's a sign there that says no right on red, they're doing that right-hand turn.
That's right. That's right. And Green Lane is very narrow, and so there's
Yes.
one lane, but there's
and
two.
This is what I'm getting at. If
Right.
it's narrow and there's a zoning change that could be done, possibly we can have some negotiation with the developer about doing some off-site work on that with either a curb gutter and whatever on that little.
That was our main concern.
Okay.
Other than that, we recognize that this is on Willow Creek. We know at some point that's going to be rezoned. Our housing development is
I'm familiar with.
okay. It's a small gated community, and but that corner has always been a problem.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mike, is there anything that could be done there?
You know, I understand the concerns about this intersection, and I've actually witnessed that too, several places around town where there's no right on red, no turn on red, and people do anyway. The issue here to me is actually the Santa Fe Springs development across the street, the commercial development. When you pull up to that intersection, obviously you're not going to make a left on red, so we're talking about right on red. When you're making a right on red, you really need to look to your left, which is north up Willow Creek. That view is blocked by the waterfall and the landscaping and the buildings of the Santa Fe Center across the street. So while we would be happy to look at whatever the commission asked us to do on our side, even into the city right-of-way, I don't know that that alleviates that view problem to the north.
That's what I wanted to find out, if it was investigated, would it alleviate the potential problem, or it would just be wasting some of your clients' money?
Thank you. Joe?
And personally, I've driven that intersection a fair amount, and I think if you put in a right turn only lane, it will just make it worse, because right now, if you get behind a car that's going straight, you can't turn right. Whereas if you have a right turn only lane, you're not going to be blocked ever from doing the right turn.
Actually, if I'm not mistaken, Joe, I think that is a right turn only lane now.
Is there?
I think that the left turn is the straight. I'm looking at the arrows there on the ground, and I believe that the left
there's
lane
a-
is the straight.
If there's a right turn only lane, then, I mean, I'd forgotten that piece.
Yeah.
And if that's true, then there's no need to add a right turn only lane. But I agree with you. You can't see to the north.
Right, and I don't know that anything we do on our side of the street will alleviate that problem. Mr. Hahn just pointed out to me that in the far northeast corner of our property, there's a couple of trees you see there. There is actually a storage building that does somewhat block some of the view, and that will be coming down. And then there is some drainage improvement also in that piece of city right-of-way. Again, we'd be happy to look at that with the commission or Ian Mattingly or whoever's appropriate. And if there's some improvement that should happen there, we would be more than happy to look at that.
Yeah, one thing that I noticed being familiar with that intersection is if you're going north on Willow Creek Road and you turn left and wanting to turn into this new office building, there would be cars stacked up coming from Santa Fe Springs, et cetera, there that may have that turn blocked. And so in order to not block traffic at that whole intersection, you would probably pull into Civil Tech and Urgent Care and go in there and turn around in their parking lot and then come back out on the street and turn in.
That could happen.
I mean, that would happen if it's queued up there. And I don't know, maybe our friend here from Santa Fe Springs knows how many times you have 5 or 6 cars to where it would block that entire driveway.
Very seldom have a big backup on Green Lane. That doesn't happen very often because there are two lanes there. So if somebody is either going straight across or making a left, they can sit there and it'll back up. The traffic becomes a problem when there's quite a bit of cars coming out of the office building area, because it's not very much room from the corner of Green Lane to their entranceway, right? Our entranceway is quite a bit farther down because of the creek that runs through there. So there's normal, so the problem is when somebody hits right, because they can't go on right, they can't turn on a right turn. you could get a buildup. But remember, there's not a lot of people live down Green Lane. So the traffic isn't, the traffic is fairly heavy going into this commercial piece and then back out again. And that's a very narrow entrance into that piece. So you have to be very careful when you pull in that there's not somebody just pulling out of that commercial area. But it's a tough intersection. We are wondering as we're planning additional work here if there's some way that we can solve some of these problems, because it's going to continue to be the situation. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else in the public? Okay.
We'd see a plat come back. Is that right? We would see a preliminary plat for the site plan.
It would come in as a building permit.
Building permit.
Actually, site plan. This wouldn't come back to Planning Commission.
You're looking at what we would look at. If there's a subdivision, you'd see the plat.
We could make a motion that normally we don't look at the plot plans when they come back, but we can make a motion to change the zoning subject to review, or change the zoning, and then this particular piece would need P&Z plot plan approval or site plan approval.
Absolutely, you could request that.
Are we in a study session today or a voting session?
You could vote today, sir. In the staff report, I did not add in the recommendation for the rezoning, simply because we've had a lot of rezonings, and if you are inclined to vote today, we do have a recommended motion that I did not include in the staff report, but is certainly on the screen. And of course, number 4, if you were inclined to vote today, you could add Mr. Scamardo's idea of having the site plan come back to Planning Commission.
And that gives staff an opportunity to review it in the site plan building permit process, make any recommendations, then negotiate them with the owner, and then when both parties are pretty much in agreement, come to the P&Z for the site plan approval prior to issuing the building permit.
That could be a condition of your motion, yes, sir.
Okay. Okay?
And we would be voting today on just the zoning?
Just the zoning.
On the rezoning, yes, sir.
And how about the general plan change?
That would be the first motion is the recommended amendment to the 2003 general plan.
The first 3, and we'd add one more.
The second one's the Willow Creek, and then
Mr. Chairman, we would add the 4th, which is what I recommended, that we have site plan approval. Normally, we leave that as an option. They don't have to come back for site plan approval on a zoning change. This one, we would approve the zoning change, but then say that the site plan had to be approved prior to issuance of building permits, which is another step they've got to jump through when they continue to negotiate with the city and do whatever they think they need to do to that particular little...
And why would we want them to come back to that?
Simply because we want to see what the site plan is going to look like.
The roadway, the
and
entrance?
Yeah, and the off-site improvements that they're planning. Or
Because you can bet at council they would get a lot of questions about that, and so we'd thresh that out of here.
Right.
well, there's sort of a chicken and the egg thing on that. The first 3 up there could proceed to council. At this point, the applicant's only asking for a rezoning. They could proceed to city council for the rezoning without having a building permit for the property. So the first 3 could move forward, and then if the applicant gets the rezoning, then they could come back for building permit and site plan review.
That's right.
I think that one...
And I'd be ready to make that motion.
But I think on the first point there, we should say 2003 general plan and draft 2015 general plan, so that it's addressed in that.
If you wish. We have to stick by the 2003 because the draft general plan, which has been adopted by City Council, has yet to be voted on the referendum.
So 203 still is in effect until
Correct.
such time as that's done and voted upon. So to try to put an amendment together.
I don't know that
I just meant administrative change to the draft, but you would do that as a matter of course, normal course, wouldn't you?
in this section of the plan, the general plan maps didn't change for 2013. But if the 2003 plan is the one in effect now. I don't know that adding the 2013 plan would do any.
I don't know if the 2015 plan has any standing at this point. Maybe our attorney can help us with that.
It's not, because it's been submitted to the voters now. We have to wait for it to be sort of approved by them before it goes into effect.
So it's IFCOM. We're talking about comment today.
Yeah, so it has no standing as of this point.
That's correct.
Well, it's just that by the time they'd ever bring in a site plan, then the general plan, maybe the new one will be approved, and then that's the one we're operating under, and then it wouldn't, it's just that maybe it's just an administrative change. You always continue to do the
Yes.
administrative changes, so then we don't need to worry.
It may not be part of the motion, may not need to be part of the motion, but certainly staff will be cognizant of that if the referendum is passed by the voters.
And Frank, what are we amending in the Willow Creek corridor plan with this motion?
You'd be largely amending the map itself to, let me pull this up.
It would get a dot on it like
Get a dot on it. It would get a dot.
That was a lob pitch.
Be amending the Willow Creek corridor plan zoning discussion map to that striped pattern recommended for land use zoning change. So yes, it would get a stripe.
Okay. Thank you. I see no reason to further discuss this. If there's a motion, I certainly would support that.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion, move to approve, recommended approval of RZ. Don't jump around on me, Frank. I have trouble looking.
Here, let me.
Okay. RZ 15-003 to amend the 2003 general plan use map from low to medium residential density to mixed use. Number 2, amend the 1997 Willow Creek corridor study and land use plan. And number 3, rezone the parcel 116-06-060B located at 903 Green Lane from single family 18 SF 18 to residential office RO. And number 4, how do you want to word the subject to P&Z site plan approval?
P&Z site plan recommendation for approval?
Yes. And then prior to building permit, a P&Z approval of the site plan. Does that cover it?
Yes, sir.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Frank, could you put this back up for the other commissioners who didn't have the ability to look at this here? I just want to make sure we're specific in what we're amending.
Why isn't it focused?
Oh, go ahead, Ken, read it.
Oh, it's clear now.
You got eye trouble, Ken?
Okie dokie, this is fun. Uh-oh.
How are we going to change zoning if we can't see that?
I don't know what happened to it.
We're all 7 of us blind anyway.
Yeah. Okay, we froze up.
Hand him the written copy.
Let me hand you the written copy. I apologize, this thing went goofy.
It's all in. It's not, they didn't have a recommendation.
If it's good enough for Lenny, it's good enough for me.
Well, the one I was going to talk about is that you wanted to change the zoning map in the general plan, not the general plan, or is that too specific?
That may be too specific.
Okay. All right, we have a motion, we have a second. Ready to vote? All those in favor, raise your right hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? We're good.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Believe it or not, that is the entire agenda except for city updates.
None at this time, sir.
nothing's happened in town and
There's a lot happening, but that would be more of a topic for either George or Mr. Geister.
I understand. Okay. Any summary of current events or recent events?
I don't have anything.
Okay, with that, I say we're adjourned.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.